livestock judging coach and an instructor in the animal science department at the University of Wyoming. I'm happy to be here sharing with you guys tonight. And like Don said, the more interactive this is, the better it'll be for everyone. I get bored just staring at a screen here talking. So please ask questions as we go along. We'll try to cover everything we have, and we'll stay on until everyone's questions are answered. So I'm just going to start right into this. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about some goals of your project. I think that's the first and foremost thing that you need to be thinking about as you go into your selection. Depending on what your goals are is probably going to dictate a little bit on what you're looking for. We'll talk about the correct age and size, maybe who you should buy from, not specific people, but just methods to buy from and some different pros and cons of buying there. And then what you probably all want to hear mostly is what traits do I need to select for, and we'll try to cover that in as much detail as possible, show you some examples, and try to explain what will hopefully help you select a successful market land project. So to start with, again, I said goals are kind of the most important thing for you to think about. And I'm sure if we asked on here, if we had a little smaller group, I'd have you go around and say, what some goals you have for your sheep project are. But since we have so many, to save a little bit of time here, I would assume that most of you will have one, if not all or multiple of these goals on here, if I was guessing. Hopefully we're doing it to learn. Hopefully that's what our 4-H projects are about, is we're learning something about it. We're learning responsibility. We're learning about sheep. We're learning about how to feed an animal. We're learning the end product quality of that. Some of us are probably saying, hey, it might be a good way to make a little money. It's a good summer job, and hopefully be able to sell that lamb at county fair and make some money. Depending on how much that is your goal, will be into your budget a little bit, and to keep in mind to give yourself a budget and understand, what you're willing to spend on a sheep is going to depend on what that goal lies out for you and what that budget looks like for you individually. Hopefully it's fun for everyone. Hopefully it's something that you can continue to do. And I think with this interactive presentations that Don's put together, hopefully that'll help, especially if some of you are beginners, then you won't be quite as lost going through it for your first time. We can learn not only selection tonight, but then fitting, showing, daily management, care, feeding, all the things that they're going to cover through the rest of the series is really cool what they've put together. And so hopefully that'll really help you out through the semester, or through you can tell I'm in university mode here, semester, through the rest of the year for you. That left one, number 1 on there, if your goal is to be very competitive, which I think all of you have a little bit of a goal of that. Obviously you're on here tonight, and a lot of your competitors are not. And so hopefully you're getting a leg up on that. And again, that's going to be based on, where you're willing to buy from, what go to, how much, some of the things that you're willing to do on there. So, but think about those goals when you start off with what you want to do, and that will help dictate maybe where, what, and how much you spend on that particular lamb to meet those goals, to make it a successful project at the end of the project in July or August, whenever you get done. All right, so first thing we're going to cover before we talk about one of the main things I'm sure everyone wants to do is make sure you make weight at county fair. The last thing you want to do is show up with the lamb that you thought was really good, and then you weigh 105 pounds and minimum weight's 110 pounds at your county fair, and so you have to show them the feeder lambs and don't get to sell that. So that might ruin some of those goals that you have. So typically I would say anywhere for easy management, December 20th to February 10th. Very few people in this region are going to fall lamb. Most lambs are born in the spring. There are some fall sales. We'll talk about some online sales stuff later, and you can do some fall stuff. The older the lamb that you get, do realize that probably the more management you're going to have as far as not making sure it doesn't get too big, it doesn't get too fat. And so I would encourage anywhere from, usually January lambs work out pretty good for our Wyoming counties. If you're, in Natrona County, I know is a lot earlier, so might need earlier January lamb there. How big of a lamb should I buy? Well, I'm just going to work with you with a little basic timeline, working backwards from fair. All right, so you need to figure out when you're going to buy that lamb, how many days you have until fair starts. All right, so I'm going to give you an example. We're going to pretend that we're going to go to a lamb sale to buy our lamb on April 7th. And we're going to say that we're going to have our weigh-in on August 1st for our county fair. And so if you just go through your months and calculate that out and go through and add up the number of days that you have, that's going to be 116 days that we need to have to gain weight on our particular lamb. Okay, so then what do we want that? Okay, well, let's understand we're about 0.5 to 1 pounds per day is what lambs are going to gain. Okay, now this can vary depending on the breed of lamb you get, the growth pattern of this lamb that we'll talk about a little bit. It will vary on how much you feed them, the quality of feed you give them, how much you're exercising them every day. So this can vary a lot. You can get it down to 0. We can, with the right kind of management and different things, we can make lambs gain 0 pounds a day. So if you get too big of a one and you weigh him in June and it weighs 130 pounds and you want him to weigh 135 at county fair, we're going to have to change our management, and you'll learn through we're not going to talk a lot about those things tonight, or really any, but understand that this is variable. It is probably pretty tough to get them to gain much more than a pound per day. It's usually, I always say, it's easier to hold than it is to push. It takes a little extra work, but it's, to me, always easier to hold animals than it is to push them. The old saying always goes, it's hard to get your steer fat at the county fair. Well, if you're a week before county fair and you're 25 pounds short on weight to get him to weigh in, no matter how hard we try, no matter how good our feed is, we're not going to get him to gain that. It's, again, a lot easier to hold. And remember, too, that we get a little hot in the summertime. And so, we may be chugging along there at 3/4 of a pound a day all through the month of June, and we're getting right on track to hit there. And then all of a sudden, the 2 weeks before county fair, it hits 110 degrees. Lambs stop eating, it gets hot, the flies get on them, they kind of shut down as far as gaining. So just kind of remember that. But if we talk about this, if we were going to average a half a pound a day, that's going to be 58 pounds gained from April 7th to August 1st. If we do get them to gain that full pound a day, is going to be 116 total pounds gained. Okay, so what do we want that lamb to weigh? Well, obviously the minimum would be your minimum weight, and I know we have some variance across Wyoming, and I saw we had some other out-of-staters on, and so depending on the county fair, that's going to vary some on how much your lamb, what your minimum weight is going to be, but that's just the minimum. I would tell you that our end goal should be anywhere from probably 125 to 155 pounds at fair time. That's going to hit the range of what I would consider to be the most competitive, depending on the judge, what their background is, maybe where they're from. You may see that they like them on the lighter end of that. You may see some that take them towards the heavier end of that. When I was showing 15 years ago, 128 to 132 is where we wanted our lambs every single time. Sheep have gotten a little bigger than then. If I had to pick a specific weight, I'd say somewhere between 135 and 140 would be an ideal weight for me. But if I'm the one judging the show, I like them to be in that 125 to 155 pound range. So again, depending on what judge you have, but if you then do that math backwards, we have 125 pound end goal. If they only gain 50 pounds during that time, we need to buy a lamb that weighs 75 pounds to start with. If they're going to gain 100 pounds during that time, we can start off with a 30 or 40 pound lamb and get them to get to that goal. And so again, that's going to vary significantly based on genetics, feed, management, etc. But that gives you an idea. Again, I think December, January, February lambs are all fine. You're going to have to hold December lambs a little more. January's are probably the easiest to manage. February's you're going to have to push just a little bit more. There are some benefits, and we'll talk when we start looking. I will bring up some benefits of different ages, okay, of what you can get into. There are some benefits of showing some older lambs. There's some benefits of showing younger lambs, depending on that management. And so that can certainly help you a little bit on what you select, on what you like to go for. And again, whether you've had great luck with them making weight in the past, or if they've gotten too big on you, maybe we need to change the size that we buy just a little bit. Okay, who and how should I buy from? Again, I'm not going to recommend or disrecommend any breeder, etc. You know, I'd prefer no questions on is this breeder a good person to buy from. Tell you, we're going to cover more so the general ways to buy them. Okay, and really, there's probably three main things that would kind of fit into this. I have it split up kind of into two. But you've got a local buyer, and I'm going to consider that kind of the private tree that you're just going to go and buy those directly from the people that are raising those sheep. And then I have a sale or online kind of on a separate one, but we can go to a live auction or an online sale. So whether it's private treaty, online, or a live auction would be the three main ways the majority of people are going to buy their lambs. Okay. Some benefits, if you buy it from a local producer, a lot of those will give you some pretty good support. Those producers will make sure that they're helping you with feed. They're making sure that things are going right. If you find a good breeder, they may, come and check on that. If you ask, they'll help you shear it. The one thing in the livestock industry that really the majority of breeders, feeders, etc. in this, judges, anyone, is really in it to try to make it a good experience for the youth. Most people that are raising sheep, feeding sheep, judging shows are doing it because they did it and it was a very impactful thing when they grew up. It's something that they love, and we want to make sure that that kind of continues on to the next generation. So don't ever be afraid to ask who you bought that lamb from. Hey, I need some help with this. It's not doing exactly what I thought it was. What should I change the feed? What feed do you recommend? To me, the closer you are to home, the more local that person is, within at least the state, or a couple hour drive, probably the more support you're going to get from that person. They're going to know you. They're going to try to build that local clientele base up. It's convenient. You don't have to worry about going to an auction. You don't have to worry, you can buy one-on-one. You can talk to the producer about what their animals are, what their genetics are. But you may not have as large of a selection. If we're going to try and we're going to say, I'm only willing to drive 30 minutes and get whoever buy the one sheep that's 30 minutes, our selection pool has significantly decreased. So that's where a live auction, especially online auctions now, give you unlimited options. And I'll give you some websites that are online. Again, I'm not recommending those, but you can buy sheep anywhere in the United States that you want. I promise that someone probably from all 50 states at some point in the year has an online auction that if you wanted to buy a sheep from New York or Pennsylvania or California, you can do it. Okay, realize though that then that person is 15, 20 hours away from you, and they may have no idea who you are. The may get home and be disappointed is the biggest thing I would tell you. If you're going to buy something online, if you are not able to go look at those animals, at a very minimum, if you can't find someone else to go look at those and look at them, call the producer up. All right, I have bought animals sight unseen without talking to the producer before, thinking, hey, I'm a good evaluator, I'll look at those and get them. Okay, the person that is selling animals, especially online, their job is to make their animals look as good as possible so they can sell it for as much money as possible. They are running a business. So just like when you watch and the Super Bowl commercials and they're trying to make their product look really good, so you go buy it, that's the exact same thing a producer that's going to sell online is doing. Their goal is to sell their stuff for as much money as possible. Okay, but if you will call them and ask them, hey, is this a good sheep? This is what I'm looking for. This is my price range. I want to be competitive at county fair. I want to be competitive at state fair. I want to win county fair. I want to win state fair. They'll start to push you towards certain sheep. Okay, I will tell you a story. I won't give you a name of who it is, but saw some baby lambs this spring, and there was one lamb that was very small and short and probably wasn't ever going to get very big. And he took an awesome picture, and they were selling that sheep online, and the producer said, oh yeah, that's a really small sheep that is just never going to get very big and probably not going to be a great sheep, but he took a good online picture. And he said, someone called me the other day and said, what's that sheep look like? And said, it's really small, I wouldn't buy it. And they said, okay. But he said, I will promise you someone will buy that sheep that never called me. And I wrote on there that it's moderate, but someone will buy that sheep that's never seen it, never called me, never asked a question. So my point is just make sure you ask, you do as much research on those animals as you can before you get there, okay? Even if you're buying it from the local producer, ask them, which one of these has been out of your best use? Which one of these do you think is going to be the best? You know, you want to find the lamb that looks good for you, and you want to find the lamb that you're going to be happy with, but someone that's raising them for a living can give you some beneficial pointers on what to look for, okay? So any questions thus far? We're going to get into the actual details of what we're looking for to select for up to this point. Dawn, have we had any on chat? All right.
Well, the ones we had you answered.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have any questions about this, shoot it to unmute, ask, or shoot it on the chat box, and Dawn will make sure and ask that to me, and we'll pause and make sure that gets answered. Okay, so we're going to start with before we decide what we're going to look for in a baby lamb, it's a lot easier to understand what the judge is going to be looking for at the end of the day. Okay, and so just show you a picture here of a lamb that I actually judged at a show recently that was very, very good and won a show. And that, to me, is kind of towards a lot of things that is going to be very good for what the market lambs are going to look like today. Okay, so what I look for when I'm judging a show, no matter if it's at a small county fair, a jackpot, or a big state fair, county show, national show, etc., is that they are market animals to start with. Okay, we're raising these to go into the food chain, and so they need muscle. We're still raising these to be market animals, and so muscle is going to be our #1 priority. Okay, finish, or the optimal amount of fat cover. Okay, sheep we want to be pretty lean on there. Goats would be the similar way, but okay, so sheep we're going to want pretty lean. We don't get a lot of benefits from extra fat like we would in hogs from bacon, or cattle from getting a little more intramuscular fats and getting that quality grade on a beef carcass. Lambs, extra fat doesn't do us a lot of good. We're just going to have to trim that when that animal is fabricated, and that carcass, we're going to have to trim all that excess fat off. And so we want those sheep to still be able to be lean, and we'll talk about how lean they need to be here in a little bit, okay? Structural correctness, I think, is very important. All animals, I think, need to be able to walk correctly. They need to be able to also balance. Kind of how pretty they are is a little bit of that showing appeal, but also just that all their pieces fit together, and they're not really big in one area and really small in another area. And then the last thing for lambs that gets especially relative to pigs and even a little bit compared to steers is that usually quite a bit of emphasis put on handle quality. So if you've shown sheep before, you know the judge is going to come handle that lamb. And that's going to mainly be a combination of muscle and finish onto there. But certain sheep will handle significantly better than others, and that can certainly help you out. Okay, so what do you want to look for when we're selecting them as babies? Well, if that's what we want to select for, what the judge is going to look for at the end, when they're babies, we want to select for the exact same things. We want to select for animals that are going to have some muscle. Now, the finish on them, obviously a baby lamb isn't going to be fat enough. That's not a finished market animal yet. So we're going to look at their width, their rib, okay, kind of their growth curve a little bit to determine where their finish and end point is going to be at. We'll look at their structure as a baby, look at their balance as a baby, and we can even handle them. I would encourage you when you go to buy those lambs, grab them, and you can do this as young as possible. Okay, I'm a firm believer. It takes a little while to train your eye, but if I'm going to buy, if I was going to buy a lamb for my son, I would try to get out earlier the better. To me, when lambs are young, I really like to evaluate lambs then when they're 2, 3, 4 weeks old. Okay, now a lot of times that's hard to do, and you're obviously just going to go to the auction or to the producer's place closer to April, May, and they're going to have a couple months age on them. But if you do get out and you start to look at things, okay, you'll start to see that they're going to have the exact same things about them when they're first born or all the way through. Okay, so producers, just give you an example, people that raise these things, they start to identify which ones they're going to keep as a ram as soon as they're born. They start to evaluate them that day when they're 1 day old. We'll start to evaluate, look at rib shape. We'll look at size of foot and bone. We'll look at levelness of hip. So we can start to look at a lot of different things at a very young age. So you can do this at any particular time. Okay, so start with for muscle. Okay, again, remember, this is what we're raising them for. To me, this is the easiest thing to select for and look at. It doesn't change the fact that it's not the most important, okay, but it is very easy to select for at a young age. Now, I say that shape is the easiest thing to change based on management. With some feed additives and on the sheep side of things, more so exercise than anything, we can tone some animals up, okay? If we don't go to the gym for a while, we haven't exercised for a while, we might be kind of flabby just a little bit. Well, if I go start lifting in the gym just a little bit, I'm going to start building muscle, okay? And mainly start to kind of shape that up and get it to be expressive. We can do the same thing in sheep with some exercise. That's a little easier to do in sheep than it is in any of our other species. And so I tell you that shape is easy to change, but it's very hard to add lots of extra muscle if it's not naturally there. Okay? No matter how much I go to the gym, I'm always going to be kind of skinny and light muscle. All right, especially compared to if we talk about one of our football players here at UW that are middle linebacker. If I go lift the same amount of time every day that our middle linebacker goes and lifts, the middle linebacker is probably always going to have more muscle because they started with more muscle. They have better genetics to have more muscle, etc., than what I do. Okay, so think about that same thing for your lambs. Okay, where we're going to look at those is there's a lot of different places to look. Okay, I always start animals at the ground, and base width is going to be very important. It's very hard to put a lot of width up high on an animal if they start very narrow at the ground. So we want animals to be wide based. We want those lambs to be what I would consider square to their corners, to where they're not wider up higher than they are down low. We can look here through their chest floor. Again, skeletal width through their chest. When we prop those things up, how wide do they look when they walk at us? How wide are they through their chest? We can handle them over their rack and loin, and that's where handle quality will come in. And a couple things, and some people that have told me when you're going to handle babies as a lamb, the couple places that really what I would highly respected people in the industry that have bought and sold a lot of lambs and all animals have told me the couple places they always look at is the forearm on a lamb, and they grab them right in the middle of their back. And if they have a lot of muscle in those two areas, they will get more muscle with time. If they're narrow in those two areas, if they have a really small forearm, this muscle right above their knee, if that's really flat and they're narrow chested, and you grab them in the middle of the back and it's really narrow when you put your hands on them, it's going to be very hard to get that animal to ever be wide enough. Yep, right there is exactly where we're wanting those at. And so, again, it's easier to evaluate back here and just see which one has the most leg from behind. We want them to have a nice turn. Remember, muscle is round, and so we want that to have a nice round shape to it and have a lot of shape and expression to it. And we can look how wide they are through their hip. And I would encourage you, if you can find one that's wider all the way through in all their areas to start with, go with that. But if you go somewhere and you see there's a lamb you really like, but is it going to have quite enough muscle? He's kind of skinny, he's kind of green. And when I go to auctions or when I try to buy animals, those are the animals I look for, is the ones that are really fat and bloomy and massed up at the auction. Those are the ones that bring the most money. I always try to save a little bit of money early on when you're buying them and try to find one that can look good down the road, but not break the bank at the beginning of the year and put us in the hole before we even get started. And so those are some areas that I would emphasize at looking at on those baby lambs, that you can maybe get a little skinnier one, a little greener one, but man, they've got a big old pop right in the middle of their back, right at their last rib. It's really wide right there. They've got a big, bold rib cage. They've got a lot of forearm. He's going to keep, the more feed we put in, the more flesh that sheep gets on him, the better that sheep is going to eventually look. Okay. So width also is very important here. Keeping, again, remember that it's the foundation for what's up above that. And so we want them, it's very hard to change with management. If an animal is narrow based, there's not much we can do other than showmanship skills of trying to deceive the judge on how wide that is. But there's not much we can do. I do say not necessarily as much in sheep as in hogs, especially, and even steers. Too much can still be a bad thing as a young animal. Okay, I really talk a lot about that if we're talking about pig selection or steer selection. If we get one that looks like he's as wide as a fat steer when he's 6 months old, well, when he actually gets to another 1,000 pounds on that calf, we're going to have some really bad structural issues. And so still, even in sheep, look at that. And too much skeletal width can start to become an issue down the road. Okay, they're going to start to have some structure issues. They're going to start to bow out in their hock. So again, I talk about squareness is key, that we want them to be even, kind of boxy from top to bottom. If we draw a line through their legs all the way up and down, it's very even. Okay. Rib cage is very important in sheep. We want sheep to have a lot of rib shape. Sheep are a little bit different than other species, okay? We don't want sheep to be quite as deep ribbed as what we do in cattle or in hogs, okay? Some reasons for that. Now on the breeding side, if anyone's showing breeding ewes in here, we do want our ewes to be deep. We want them to look like they're gonna be good moms, have some capacity, etc. But again, depth doesn't really add any valuable cuts to us in lambs. And because we want lambs, market lambs, to be lean, the deeper they get, typically the fatter they are, and we start to lose what we're going to call boneless, closely trimmed retail cuts, the percentage of those on that particular carcass. And so as we start to look through there, we want a lamb that has what I'd call a very round rib shape. Ideally, a sheep's rib cage is as wide as it is deep. So when you go to look at it, think about it like a pop can, a barrel, anything that has that nice round shape to it. That's going to be what we want. A deep, flat rib cage is not what we want. Then we can't put muscle up on top of that rib cage, and they're going to get fatter. There's going to be more waste on that. Okay, even as some byproducts, not some high-valued cuts, but on sheep, on hogs, and on cattle, you can go and you can get ribs quite a bit. If we order ribs, hey, we're still getting some value out of that. Yeah, we can put a rack of ribs on the grill from a sheep, but that's not going to be where we get the majority of our value of cuts from. And so we don't see just very much value in lower rib in sheep to get them really deep. Okay, so again, think about a pop can. Think about we want it as wide ribbed as we want them deep. At the end of the day, just so you're as aware, ideally I would say anywhere from 2 to 3 tenths of back fat, okay, 0.2 to 0.3 inches of back fat is ideal. As a baby, the things that you're going to want to look at, age is going to factor into that. The older lambs get and the heavier they get, they will just naturally start to put on fat. Okay, they're going to stop growing. Their skeleton will start to kind of peter out, and they'll stop getting taller and longer. And so any extra energy and all that feed we're giving them, they're going to convert to reserves in their body to be able to be energy reserves if they don't ever get enough energy, and they're going to use those extra energy reserves stored as fat. Okay. Growth curves as a baby is what we'll probably look at the most. Okay, and we'll talk about what some things change in that. Gender affects it just a little bit. Okay, ewe lambs will typically get fatter earlier than wethers will. So if you've gone to fair a couple times and then you've shown ewe lambs and the judge says, hey, you've gotten too fat, maybe we can look at showing a wether lamb instead. But lots of ewes are plenty fine. I showed lots of ewes are shown and are very successful. So I'm not telling you to buy a wether or buy a ewe. There is just typically wethers will typically get a little bit bigger and stay a little bit leaner than what ewes will. Okay, on a mature animal, when we start to look at that and we get to market, okay, and take it to fair, we're going to look at over their ribs. We're going to handle them over their ribs, look through their chest floor, how deep their chest is, how much fat they have up over here over their dock, is some places I look at when I'm judging lambs to determine how fat a particular lamb is. Okay, again, we're not going to be able, no lamb's going to be fat, overly fat when we get them right away. Hopefully, you know, if they're fat at 80 pounds, I would not buy that lamb. Okay, if they're already starting to be super, super fat, they're probably, something's going on with that sheep. They're too early maturing. You know, maybe the producer just pushed them to be too fat too early, and it's going to be hard to get that sheep to kind of continue on. Okay, so growth indicators is the main thing to look at when they're young. Okay, this is a picture of some lambs that we judged at a feedlot a couple years ago. And this old lamb would be one of those sheep that we'd say is just very small, almost dwarfism, has some dwarf genes in it, into there. Okay, this lamb, where we talk about to look at if we were looking at these as babies. Okay, and right now, you know, kind of a boxy, very stout, wide, big bone lamb is popular in the show ring right now. But it's easy to make them very boxy and big boned if we make them smaller. So don't just get caught into the widest one, because the widest one may be the smallest one eventually as well. And so where we want to look at, we can look at their length of face and their muzzle when they're babies. But we want to look at how tall fronted they're going to be. And if they kind of have a run uphill a little bit, those sheep will, if we hold them and we prop them up and they're a little taller at the top of their shoulder than they are back at their hip, that sheep's probably going to continue to grow and get bigger and get big. Okay, length of cannon bone, we're going to talk about the bones from their hock down to their pastern, their knee down to their pastern right down here. Okay, and we can see compared to these two lambs right here, how short this lamb is on that front cannon bone right there. Okay, that has a very short cannon bone, and it's very going to be just always very, very small. Okay, length of body would also be a good indication when we're picking these baby lambs out. Again, if they're really short, if they're as wide as they are long, that sheep's probably not going to grow just a whole lot. Okay, they're cool to look at. They're neat. Hey, they may be a great jackpot lamb because they're going to be a little fatter than everything else early on. But when you get down to the end of it at county fair time, your lamb's going to fatten out at 120 pounds, and the judge wants a 135-pound lamb, and you're in the lighter weight division, and you're not quite big enough there to tie into for the judge to kind of select for. So make sure you're not just finding a little what we call quick lamb that is never going to grow for us, and those are the places I'd look for. Hey, Dawn, I'm going to take a little water break here. Any questions up to this point? Anybody?
We don't have anything in the chat box. Does anybody have a question for Caleb? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask? Now's a great time.
Hi, I wanted to know if Caleb could go over what he was talking about with the front end height again, if it was being taller than the back, or specifically with that. He said it would continue to grow.
Yep. So, when I look at baby lambs, I do like the front end to be taller than the back end. That's something that will help with balance a little bit, is that judge will talk about them kind of running uphill. And by uphill, we talk about from their butt up to their front end. And we want that front end to be a little bigger. Kind of opposite of what you think about as maybe like a colt. If you've ever been around young horses, you know, those horses that have really long cannon bones at their back, and they have a really steep drop down into there, they're going to grow up eventually and get up to that point where if they start out kind of level, we're not going to get as much growth. Not so much in sheep. Okay, those lambs that kind of run downhill and are very moderate to start with, they kind of hunker down, are going to be the ones that stay a little smaller because, again, this bone right up here is going to be pretty short. And so, again, as we grab them, the other thing is as we prop those babies up, and I would always encourage that you pick that lamb. And one thing I don't have in here, but I will tell you right now, when you're selecting those lambs, when you start talking about showmanship, bracing is one of the biggest things to be a successful showman of sheep. You've got to have a lamb that braces. I'm a firm believer that that is partly genetics. And that there are certain genetic lines that I can go grab a 2-week-old baby lamb. They might back up a step or two, but they're going to drive right into me and brace right away. And so that's something I would encourage you as well, to go ahead and grab one of those lambs, whether you grab it, see if it'll brace up into you a little bit. And if all that lamb wants to do is pull away, that lamb might be a little bit harder to show the rest of the year because we're going to have to do some extra management techniques to train it to brace, but it's never going to be fully natural for that particular animal. And so, but then as we grab them, we can see if they're bracing, see how long their neck is, see how long it comes out. And again, we can look at this picture here. I know they're big lambs, okay, but we can see, hey, this lamb has a really long neck. This one's really short. And that would have been the same way as those things were little babies. I was just on our way down to San Antonio. We stopped and looked through, worked out at a sheep place, and I wanted to look through some babies and see what they were on a kind of a prominent breeder. And there was plenty of them out there. Right now, a lot of breeders are trying to make them as wide and stout and big boned as possible. There's lots of little lambs out there that had little necks and little heads on them that big that were always going to be very small framed lambs. And so you got to find that balance. The taller they are, the bigger they're going to get, but it's going to be harder to make them look really wide and stout. The shorter we make them, it's going to make them look wide and stout, but they're going to be kind of little sheep. So you try to find that balance. Balance is a very good thing in selecting livestock.
So Caleb, there's some other questions.
Okay.
So it's just to follow up on maybe that one. So one of the question is, so do you want a short lamb or not? So I know you kind of said that, but maybe if you want to just
moderate to me is good. And by moderate, I mean, I don't want a tall, old, gangly lamb that's twice as tall as it is wide. Okay. At the same time, I don't want a little short lamb that's going to end up looking like this. So is that me, Dawn?
That's writing on there. No, I'm not sure who that is.
Okay. All right. Draw us good pictures, whoever it is. So this lamb right here, you can see this would be Bobby Doorbell right here. She's about 5'6", and that lamb barely comes up above her knee. Okay, so this again, you can kind of think Zane here was about 6 foot tall. He's down on one knee, and that knee is about as tall as that particular lamb was. And so that's not real fun. Now, I will tell you that depending on your age and experience level, smaller sheep are easier to handle. And so if it's your first year showing and you're 9 or 10 and weighs 60 pounds, hey, I wouldn't go try to find a lamb that's going to finish out at 150 or 160. I'd go try to find a smaller lamb and be okay that it's only going to weigh 120 pounds at county fair because you'll have a better experience. The bigger they get, the more overpowering they get when the judge comes to handle. Hey, it might try to jump and come over the top of you, and it's harder for a younger person to handle that lamb. It's going to be harder for them to hold on to without a halter when we're doing that. So depending on your experience level, you know, if you're young and haven't shown a lot before, yeah, I would definitely look at getting a little smaller lamb. Now, again, so that's back based on goals. If we're trying to say what's the ideal sheep for me to pick at, it's going to be 130 to 140 pound lamb that's not too fat at that range and doesn't look like this little guy does right here. So does that answer that question good enough?
Yeah, I think that's good, Caleb. I think it kind of ties into the next question. That's kind of a general question. Is they said they have a lot of first or second year members, and any suggested for that project. So I think you hit about that just now in regards to maybe a smaller frame sheep is not a bad choice. Do you have something else to add to that?
Nope, I think smaller framed. I mean, if you're going to pick that lamb out, any sheep is going to be very breakable. I mean, sheep are very easy to make docile and to get to be friendly with humans. The more time you spend with them, they will get to really like you. But there's always animals that just naturally are a little more docile than others as well. And so when you go and select that, if it's your first year and you go stand in the middle of the pen and a couple of them come up and are nibbling on you and smelling you and are interested, and there's a couple of them bouncing off the walls trying to run away from you, you know, I probably wouldn't pick the one that's bouncing off the wall. That one's going to be a little harder to halter break. It's going to be a little harder to hold on to. Breed wise, I don't think there's, you know, really any differences. And I don't have anything in here breed wise. You know, for those of us in Wyoming, we only show kind of based on 3 classifications typically. White face, speckle face, black face. I don't know that there's any counties, Dawn, that show differently than that. I would tell you that Southdown lambs are usually very calm. The breed is Southdown. The problem Southdowns get into is usually you'll cause, if you take a Southdowns lamb to the county fair, you'll probably cause a fight between the sheep superintendents on whether a Southdowns is a white face or a black face or a speckle face, etc. And the other thing is Southdowns stay very small. And so if you have, a Southdowns is only going to weigh about 120 pounds. A really good Southdowns is going to weigh 120 pounds instead of 140 pounds like a white face, a speckle face, a black face. Sometimes white face and speckle face can have a little bit more attitude to them. But again, if you find a calm one there, if it's your first year and have never done it, there's usually smaller classes in white face and speckle face. A lot of times it's harder to, there's less people breeding those, so you're gonna have a little less selection criteria. But speckle faces usually have less, I guess probably competition, I would say. There's just gonna be less quantity of those sheep at county fairs. So again, just all based on your goals of what you wanna do.
So I do want to just add to what Caleb said about the producer and the attitude in the sheep. That is a realistic thing. And honestly, Caleb mentioned a few for you guys that are your first year about talking to the producer and asking your producer about that. That's another thing that they can ask. I will say today we had a baby lamb born and there was 2 of them in the pen and my daughter came in and said, man, that's a high-headed sheep. And what I knew from what she said is that's going to be a snot head when it gets bigger. And she knew it, and it was just born. Does that make sense? And so I think a producer can definitely help with that too. So Caleb, that's a great comment. There's a couple more here before we let you move on. It says, is a long face or a short face better?
It's just kind of, again, medium, balance, and just kind of in the middle is good. But if it has a really long, narrow head, it's probably gonna have a really long, narrow body. If it has a really short, wide head, it's probably going to have a really short, wide body. And so their muzzle and their skull and their head is usually a pretty good reflection of their back. I wouldn't put a ton of emphasis on heads, okay? That's something that I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on. Look at how long their legs are, look how long their neck is. Those will be easier things to be able to tell on those.
And then just one final question in the chat box right now. It says, so like waist size for kids showing. So like waist size for the kids showing. Oh, so depending on, they're talking about however tall the lamb is, or however tall the kid is that's how tall the lamb should be. So should it be like proportionate, I guess is what I'm saying.
Somewhat, just though if you're 9 years old showing for the first time and again weigh 60 pounds, if we make a sheep that's to your waist, we're probably not going to get that lamb to make weight. And at the same time, if you're 6'4" and a senior, we probably don't want a lamb to be your size. So we want a pretty moderate size. It's probably that's, again, going to change more so how we show them just a little bit. When I first started showing them, I was 9. I almost like showing better then because you could get a lamb that you could just set their head up on your shoulder and use your whole body to push into, and that's about how tall I wanted. The lamb was about as tall as I was. When you get the taller you get, the harder it is to kind of get down to their level and show them properly. So again, I wouldn't necessarily, if you're smaller, I wouldn't just try to pick a really small sheep. You can get it tame enough, and with enough work and enough effort, dedication, you can get those lambs to do anything you want if you get a docile lamb for it. I've seen videos of people that even at a pretty young age, they've worked with their lambs enough that they can barely hold it or even let go of its head, and it just stands there while they move the feet around. And they've worked with that lamb so much that it just knows to stand exactly where it is. And they're good enough buddies that there's no fear in that sheep anymore. It doesn't try to get away. It just stands there the whole time.
Okay, I think we're good.
All right, so I just have a few more slides here to talk about. So structural correctness is a big thing if you're trying to look to be very competitive. It's the hardest thing to probably learn to evaluate, especially in young animals. But their skeleton and how their bones are laid together, you cannot change with management. We can trim feet a little bit, if they have long toes and they are maybe hawked out a little bit or something. But if a sheep has a steep hip when it's born, no matter how much we exercise it, no matter how much we feed it, its hip structure from hooks to pins is always going to be very steep. And so I'd encourage you to try to find an animal that, again, has some proper angle to the shoulder, okay, flexibility of spine, probably in sheep, hip structure is going to be one of the biggest things that dictates balance. Is we want them to be very level out to their dock from an eye appeal standpoint, and then be very square in terms of hock placement. And so, you know, we talk a little bit more about shape and size of toes if we were talking about hogs or cattle, you know, flexibility of spine and angle of all this stuff. I will say, of all the species, structure probably has the least importance in sheep because they're the smallest. And so they never get to a weight that's really going to be difficult on them to be super structurally incorrect. Where we can go to the fair, and you probably, if you've ever watched the pig show, you probably see one of them that has a big old top and a big old butt, but it can hardly even walk in the ring because it's just so structurally incorrect. Cattle the same way. Okay, we can get those calves that can barely walk. They're really short stepping. Sheep are less that way because we're showing them at 120 pounds, not 250 pounds or 1,500 pounds. So, but again, I still think it's very important. Okay, just show you some slides here. And we've got, we'll talk about length of blade here in a second, and this will be kind of a side topic, but there's a really, that's a controversial term right now when we talk about length of blade, and whoever drew our picture here was giving us some nice examples of where to look at some length and depth here. So that's okay. But if we look at these two lambs right here, okay, we would say that this lamb over here on the right is a little more structurally correct. Okay, if we look at this animal and we talk about angle of shoulder, okay, we're going to look at the top of their shoulder. Maybe I'll try to draw in here since someone showed us that we can do this. Let's see.
Maybe we could erase that. I don't know how.
Erase all income. I don't know if I can. That's okay. We'll draw here for a second. So we pick from the top of their shoulder, okay, right up here, there we go, down to the base of their shoulder, right down here. And ideally, we want that to be about a 45-degree angle. Okay, and so if we look back up here at the top of this one's shoulder blade, down to the angle of it right there, that one has a lot more angle to its shoulder than this particular lamb does right back here. Okay, and so then as we study it down here into this one's knee, we start to see this one kind of has a forward bend to its knee right here. Okay, that's not really going to be ideal from a structure standpoint because we have it a little too straight. It's not going to look as good when we move it. Okay, some other concerns on this sheep right here is as we draw down its top line, I'm a bad artist, so you'll have to forgive me. We kind of have a dip right there, but mainly we kind of get that spot right up there where we get it pretty, okay, and I'll erase it so you can maybe see it just a little bit better. We kind of have a hump right in the middle of its back, okay? So that wouldn't be ideal. And then another thing, like I said, the hip structure is going to be very important on these. And if we look here, we want it to be very flat. I mean, this thing looks like it has just a very flat tabletop back on it all the way, right? It's very good right here all the way down. Whereas we come down to here, and this one especially out of its hip, we really start to round that out of its dock. And the older that sheep gets, the more it's going to be that way. Okay, I just pulled these offline. These sheep have already sold. I just got online. I'll show you what website that you can get on and look at. Okay. Hey, now this is a good looking sheep right here, right? This would be like, I would tell you that's a really good sheep. Okay. It's also a very expensive sheep. So you got to keep in mind what your budget is. To tell you, I'll just tell you, I think this sheep sold online for like $500. The sheep sold online for $4,000. So again, budget wise, we didn't talk about that. If you're wondering, hey, this is my first time showing, what can I expect? If you go and just buy just a regular old lamb from someone, you could probably find, I could find you a lamb for $100, and I can find you a lamb for you name it. I can find it as expensive as you want to go. It's kind of really kind of stupid how expensive some animals sell for nowadays. But it can be from about $100 to way too much money for a sheep that we could probably all agree on, that no one wants to spend quite that much on a lamb, okay? But again, balance is really good. Here we talk about length of neck. We can kind of see, again, that sheep kind of runs uphill like we were talking about right here. If we drew a level all the way back down there, its top is, its front end's a little taller than its back end. It has that level hip. It has a long neck. Okay, it has those things. So, okay, again, we would agree that this one right here, okay, hopefully you can see is better structured. So we're gonna change, and mine went with me here, okay? So here, balance, this would be what a big sheep would look like, balance, okay? Very correctly. Again, everything balances very evenly. The front end looks like it's about the same size as the middle end is the back end right down there. It doesn't have all of its weight in one area of the body. It has that nice level top line. Okay, the neck sits out very tall and nice out of the top side of that sheep. Okay, it has a very level underline right down through there. It's not a lot deeper here than it is back through here, etc. And that's what we like to see. Okay, so we like sheep. We again want to kind of run uphill. We want them to be taller shouldered. We want them to have a nice length of body. We want them to be long and level out of their hip. And again, just really the definition of balance. All things fit together. The front end equals the back end. The top kind of equals the bottom, etc. Okay. One thing in this line right here, one thing that we do think about balance, and you can look at when you're selecting, okay, if you draw a line from an animal's flank line to the top of their shoulder, okay, and it's very, animals don't change a lot as you start to train your eye. If you draw that line right there, we want those to be even, or we want more weight on the back end of the animal. Okay, and that's just coming from a carcass perspective. The majority of our valuable cuts of what a judge is looking for, and that's what we're trying to determine, which animal is going to be worth the most, which one has the best carcass. We're going to get almost all of our value from the rack, the loin, and the leg of a lamb. We get very little value from the belly, the rib, the neck, and the shoulder. Okay, the shoulder has a little bit of, that's a primal cut, is what we would call that, a major cut of the lamb, but it's pretty cheap. If you go to the grocery store, the shoulder is going to be a lot cheaper than the leg. And so if you look, we want those lambs to have a lot more weight in the back end, okay, again, their rack, loin, and leg, than what we do up in their front end. And that, to me, is very true in all species, that you can draw that line and look at right through there, okay? So here, again, balance-wise, we have some lambs here that this one kind of has that balanced look. This would be one, we talked about the forearm earlier. Okay, if you look at how big that forearm is right there, that's going to be a very muscular sheep down the road. And so, again, a very, very high quality sheep, okay, that's probably going to hurt the pocketbook a little bit more than what you'd ideally like. But if you can find one that looks like it's going to grow up and be like that at a reasonable price, that's what you're trying to do, is to try to find that sleeper of the group that we can talk about. Okay, here we have a lamb that's a little frailer boned. Okay, we see that balance-wise, back on here. We see, again, if we draw that line here, even on baby lambs, get it to draw here, we start to see that there's quite a bit of weight down here in its shoulder. It kind of has a big coarse shoulder, and that's kind of pointy right out here. We see that it has a dip right here at the top side of its neck, and I'll erase that so you can see that again. Okay, but we want that neck to come out of the top side of its shoulder very correctly, and to be kind of tall fronted like this one does. We can see that there's no breakdown of what we eventually call a sheep being ewe-necked, is where we call that on that particular lamb. Okay, again, we see the sheep's a little rounder hipped. It's a little finer boned. It has some of those things about it. Okay, so those are kind of the final things to talk about. One thing that's usually always a popular question is, what are the trends in the showing? What are the cool things that people are looking at? Okay, I'll tell you, these are the extras on top right here, but focus on the fundamentals. When you go to county fair, the lambs that are more muscular, that aren't too fat, that aren't too lean, and that they balance up nicely are going to be competitive in your class, and you're going to have a good chance to have a competitive lamb. Okay, these are some things that separate maybe from the county fair level to the state fair level to the national level on some things that may, the bigger show you get, some things you're going to look at. Okay, underlines, what I mean by underline is that we want those lambs to be shallower or shorter in their shoulder and their chest than they are back through their flank and back through their stifle. So ideally, an underline of a sheep progressively gets deeper from the point of their chest, back through their forehead, back through their flank, back here to their stifle. Okay, and so just like the top line that we want that to be a little taller, the same with their underline. Right now, deep flanks are kind of popular, and to kind of have more so of look like a steer or a heifer, not deep down here, up front here, but deep back through their flank line a little bit is a popular thing. Okay, we talked about length of blade. Again, that's kind of the length of their shoulder right here on just how long, how tall fronted they're going to be up here. But we don't want this shoulder blade to run. If we want this point of the shoulder where it is right here, if that runs all the way down, okay, and it's really long shouldered, it's going to throw them out of balance a little bit. Mainly just look like, make their underline look a little odd. Okay, bone, and I put in quotation shags. That's what people talk about. Hey, those are popular right now. That's the amount of boot wool. Okay, if we come back a couple pictures, I'm going to go way back here. I'll show you one that has a lot of shag. Okay, this lamb has a lot of shag right here. That's all this wool from its hock and its knee down. Okay, it's popular right now. It makes them look pretty. It has very little value as far as carcass. Okay, when we take that into the carcass, that just gets thrown into a trash barrel. Okay, but it makes your lamb look pretty, and it does make it balance better. And so you can look at that. Okay, the Hampshire breed is a little more popular right now than the Suffolk breed. And so Hampshire influence is going to have this wool up on its face, on its eye channel, have all this wool down below its legs. Okay. It's not going to change just a whole lot. Okay, it's just a popular trend. Just kind of as something, a little thing you can look at. I'm sure as we get down, or as you get into your next part of these clinics and trainings, they'll probably talk a little bit about daily hair care and how to wash that, and if you're trying to get it to have a little bit more. Okay, again, that's not the most important things. Select on muscle, select on structural correctness, select on those things. Okay, so final point to remember that I'll tell you, and then we'll take field questions that we have. Selection is only a small part of your project. Okay, a bad showman and a bad feeder can take a great animal and make it very average. Okay, I could take that $4,000 lamb and make him never win a show in his whole life. Okay, or I can go take a $200 lamb and have someone that works with it every day, feeds it very well, shows, takes care of it, does all the proper management techniques, and it can go win its county fair. Okay, so it's not all about the price at the beginning. But we can't play magic either. You can't invent something that's not already there. You have to have some quality to start with. Okay, again, I didn't say you could take a bad lamb and make it great. That's impossible. No one's a good enough showman. No one's a good enough feeder to do that. But we can take an average lamb. Okay, we can take a less expensive lamb, and with proper management, proper feed, can go beat the person that spends a lot more money than us on it. Okay, and that's rewarding. That's what I like to do, is go outwork them, out hustle them, and have more selection criteria to start with. Dawn, I don't think I sent this with you, so I'll send a new one up. But here's some resources for you. ChampionDrive.com, if you've never been around sheep very much, is a great resource. They post lots of winners from national and state shows. So you can get online and start to look at, okay, this is what a good lamb is supposed to look like. The bottom three are just online websites. If you go, okay, what's this online thing he was talking about? Again, I highly, highly encourage you, if you've never selected sheep before, I don't know that I would buy them online. Go find a producer, go find someone that raises them, that's going to help you out, that's going to support you. Okay. Now there's people in Wyoming, okay, that you might, there's people, I know, Dawn, I don't know if you guys do anything online, but I know there's families in Torrington that have online sales, Casper, Powell, Billings. There's lots of places that are still local that might put their lambs online. It's getting to be more and more popular way to sell. Go talk to them. Go look at those lambs beforehand, and then you can look at them and bid on them. Okay, so all three of those bottom ones are that. Again, the ChampionDrive.com, they've got lots of resources on there you can look at. They've got judging contests, or you can get on and look at people on prospect lambs and try to pick out what your favorite prospect lamb was, etc. So that is all I have. So I'll end it with, again, what a kind of ideal lamb is supposed to look like. Okay, that was the reserve champion lamb at the National Western Stock Show a couple weeks ago. Okay, so if any of you find a lamb that looks like that for a couple $100, let me know and we'll make a lot of money on him. So it's hard to make lambs look like that. So again, figure out what your goals are. Hey, find someone. If it's your first year, you're doing the right thing by being on here now. Keep asking questions. Okay, go find things. And usually, what I like to say, if you show enough work and show enough effort, find that person in the county fair that you think, hey, that person's won our county fair a few times. Let me go ask. You know, again, 90%, you'll find that 10% that's not very friendly, and they have their trade secrets and they don't want to share anything with anyone. Okay, but you go find, I promise, okay, we can find you someone that, if you have no experience, ask questions. Find someone that's done it for 2 years. Find someone that's done it for 5 years. Find someone that has done it for 50 years. Okay, and just ask. And no question is ever a dumb question. If you have a question, so does probably a lot of other people.
There's a couple questions in the chat box.
Okay.
It says, so I've been showing for about 4 years. The last couple times I've had a smaller lamb that would be the weight class for a heavier sheep to show them, about 120 pounds. So I've been showing for about 4 years. The last couple times I've had smaller lambs. What would be the weight class for a heavier sheep to show, oh, this individual weighs about 120 pounds. So they're saying how big they are. So they weigh about 120 pounds. How big of a sheep should they get for a heavier weight class?
Yeah, 130, 140 in that range. You know, and I told you, I never really talked about it. The advantages, I'm going to go back to something I talked about early on. Advantages of young lambs versus old lambs. Okay, an old lamb is going to be easier to get to a heavier weight. An old lamb, you know, a December born lamb or an early January relative to a February, the more age lambs gets on them, typically the more muscle they get, typically the more bone they get, etc. So they'll look just a little stouter, they'll look a little wider and bigger. They'll also start to get fatter. Okay, so they'll start to get out of balance a little bit. And we draw that line, the older they get, the deeper the chest, the bigger the shoulder, the bigger the neck, the harder it is to make them look very well balanced of what we want in the show ring. And so there's trade-offs there, young versus old. But, you know, that 130 pounds is what I'd shoot for. If you're a little smaller, I'd shoot for the 115, 120. But if you get a nice tame lamb, 125-pound lamb is very manageable. Okay, I wouldn't try to get a 160 or 180-pound lamb. Okay, but I tried to get you a 120, 130-pound lamb, and that's going to be in there. If there's a good lamb at 130 pounds, I'll use it all day long. Okay, if I'm judging a show, they don't need to be bigger. Here in the north, we take them closer to the 130 pounds. Okay, the further south and into the Midwest you start to go, the more you creep up to that 140 and 150 is what they consider ideal. But in Wyoming, most Wyoming county fairs, you know, I bet if we did a research project, if this data was out there to find, I would say the average lamb, grand champion lamb at most county fairs on average would be about 130 pounds. So, Dawn, you think that's fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so the next question, does color matter?
It does not. I don't, for me as a judge, it does not. Now you might have a judge that does. I can't promise you that, okay? But color does not matter. One thing I will tell you, if you like a blue lamb, okay, if you want a lamb that has that black hide or that blue look to it, when you look at them as babies, the only way I've found to for sure tell, if you look at the inside of their ear, and the inside of their ear is very dark pigmented, and the skin is dark pigmented on the inside of their ear, they will stay black or blue colored. If they have really dark wool, but they have white skin in the inside of their ear and it's lightly pigmented, that sheep will eventually turn whiter wool than have more of this white wool color, okay? So, you know, if you were looking at a couple back here, I actually had, you know, hey, these ones, they're going to be white, okay? Very obvious those are going to be white. These two lambs both look like they could be blue or stay black, and you'd want to look at the inside of their ear. You know, this one looks really black to me. This one looks like he may just kind of have that kind of black underlining, kind of what I'd call more of a silver sheep. Color doesn't matter. Speckle faces, white faces, different things. No, I don't think it matters at all.
Perfect. Okay.
Good question, though.
Do you feel that the blue lambs are harder to get on the gain?
Yeah, they can be. So blue typically is going to have a little more Suffolk in them. It'll be easier to find a blue or more Suffolk lamb that's going to have that kind of tall front end, that very lean, shallow kind of tubular look to it somewhat, but they're going to be typically a little slower gaining. They're going to take just a little more time typically. That's usually correlated with they're a little flatter ribbed. A lot of times, you may get a little narrower based sheep in there. They're just not going to gain quite as well. So absolutely, that I would say that is true, but you find some that are fine as well. So.
Perfect. Okay. There's a question on here, and I don't know, Caleb, if you want to touch up on it. We are going to do a workshop on feeding. So it just says how much is best to feed a market lamb to get it up to weight. So I don't know that if you want to touch on that, you're welcome to. If not, we can defer it and they can jump on the feed workshop. So it's kind of up to you.
The one thing I will tell you is that it usually takes about 5 pounds of feed for 1 pound of gain in a lamb. And so as you start to budget, if you say, hey, we've got to gain 50 pounds, it's probably for the year, it's probably going to take you about 250 pounds of feed to do that. And so that would be the only thing I would add in on that. Other than that, I think that's a whole new can of worms to save for the feed discussion.
Perfect.